Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition episode of the Modern Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dennis Tien, MD, MPH of Beth Israel Lahey Performance Network, joined by my producer, David Yaz, and my friend, MPH Brian Kirby, and we have convened this special episode to talk about the hot issue that everybody is talking about this week, and that is the relationship between Tylenol and autism. Of course, all this brought on by a press conference a few days ago with our president regarding the potential or proposed the effects of autism, relationship between autism and acetaminophen. And this is the place to be if you're confused, if you're lost, if you can't quite make sense of it all. We are going to kind of get thick into it and talk about, what we think about this, kind of break it down, I think, in a very scientific way, and talk a little bit about how we think this all works. So, Brian, welcome. This is your first episode on the Modern Medicine Podcast.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me. I must correct you one thing. I'm not an MPH, Masters of Science in the Public. Two different things. Masters
of Science in Public, but a man that truly loves epidemiology and public health, much like myself.
That is true.
We'll actually read a paper.
All right. I love reality.
Yeah, there you go. Reality.
Although I am a Star Wars junkie like yourself. Yeah. Not quite as bad, but.
Fair enough. I'm a big believer that reality is overrated, but that's another discussion for another day. Anyways, all right, we're going to get into this whole thing between acetaminophen and autism because it was such a big thing. And I just want to start because what I really found amazing about this whole thing and what's happened the last few days in this country, in the media, on social media, et cetera, is the way that this very nuanced issue, which most of the things we do in science are nuanced, right? In the relationship between acetaminophen and autism, we're going to get into it. It's not simple. It's not as simple as some people want it to be. I do think the literature points a clear way, and we're going to get into that, all right? I do think the literature points a clear way, but it's never black and white. It's never cut and dry. But what was really interesting to me is how both the political extremes in this country took this as an opportunity to pick up the ball and really make this into a cut and dry issue and make this into a political issue and make this into supporting their narrative. And I thought that was really a frightening testimony, a frightening statement about the state of how we get information in this country, because we get a lot of information right now, and the reality is not only is there a lot of misinformation out there, because there's also a lot of information out of context. And the more I look at it, the more I realize that information taken out of context is probably more dangerous than misinformation. And I think this is really relevant to this whole thing. And you're going to see that because we're going to spend the next half hour talking about some of the literature around acetaminophen and autism. And I think when you do that, and hopefully if you watch this episode, you're going to emerge as an audience with a better understanding of this issue that will help not only this one issue, but will help with everything else. Because one thing about this acetaminophen and autism thing, the issues we're talking about, they're not unique to this one issue. These are things that come up in pretty much every single thing we do in medicine, in public health, in science. So let's get into it. Let's start. I want to start with you, producer Dave, because I know you have a son that has autism, and I'm just curious how you reacted to this sort of, cut and dry announcement from our president this week about autism and Tylenol.
Yeah, at first I was pretty pissed off, to be blunt. Autism is presented in a kind of cruel way to parents. So my son's 27 now. He's verbal. He kind of has the developmental level of the Dustin Hoffman character in Rain Man. Mm-hmm. So you can see he has a wonderful personality, he has a sense of humor, but he's always going to need some help, and he's not capable of too much, not capable of like full conversational speaking, although you can certainly get a sentence out of him. But like a lot of autism parents, we didn't see anything wrong with him in the first, say, 6 months of his life. And then it's very cruel the way it occurs. It appears that the child starts to slip away from you, stops making eye contact, doesn't hit the developmental cues that his peers are hitting. And so this announcement, it causes parents are always sort of worried that they did something wrong. We were afraid we let him watch too much Sesame Street and Elmo, and he was just obsessed with Elmo. It's all he could talk about. We thought that gave him autism. I mean, sort of. I mean, you want an answer because it looks like something went wrong. That's why vaccines became a theory which to date at least is false. But so yeah, the distaste I have for the president and RFK Jr.'s announcement is it does in a way sort of cast some blame on women, moms who took Tylenol. It's just human nature. They're going to look at that and they'll go, geez, I took Tylenol. I mean, I had a fever. The doctor said take Tylenol. And we can get into it, but so it is hurtful, and I did sort of take it personally. I think you're going to get into this, but I think at the end of the day, what the brass did there was a little bit more manipulative and, as you say, out of context than outright false. They took a nugget of maybe use discretion when prescribing Tylenol. That's one thing. It's a lot different to do a whole press conference with the precursor being that RFK Jr. had promised a cure to autism was coming soon. And so now here's the press conference. Tylenol's bad. And so, yeah, hurtful.
So I think he makes a great point there. RFK promised he was going to announce the cause in September, and then he felt like he had to do, I don't know exactly, but yeah, so they latched onto this. Here you go.
Right.
Let's get into this a little, because this is how I want to kind of kick it off is what's in dispute and what isn't in dispute about this information, because facts are facts, and you can't get around facts. And when you look at these papers, there's a couple things that are facts, and I think it's important to blame, because the way that this was represented to the American people in that press conference was that Tylenol use causes autism. So let's just take a step back and look at what we're talking about here. The first thing you can say, based on facts, because there's been a lot of papers, there's been a lot of studies about this. I have a meta-analysis. One has 13, one has 9 papers. I got about 23 papers right here, actually in this stack, right? So there's been a lot of study on this. The first thing you can say is that somewhere around 1.35% of pregnancies that didn't report or get measured or have any evidence that they took Tylenol are autistic. And another thing you can say based on facts is that depending on which of these studies you look at, about 1.4, 1.45, maybe one or two of them hit 1.5% of pregnancies that did have some evidence they took Tylenol had autism. So what does that mean? It means that most women that had autistic children had no evidence that they took Tylenol during their pregnancy. It also means that most women that took Tylenol did not have autistic children from their pregnancy, right? So what we're talking about is in dispute is that throughout all these studies, we have seen a 5 to 15% increased risk in women that took Tylenol to have an autistic child. That doesn't mean it caused it. That just means what we see that association. But we're talking about one small risk factor. We know through 50 years of science and research that there are many genetic and environmental and neurodevelopmental factors that go into autism that are completely independent of Tylenol, right? So the impression that a healthy unborn fetus would somehow become autistic because a pregnant woman decided to take a moderate amount of Tylenol, regardless of whether there is a true association or not, and for the record, I lean towards that there isn't, but regardless of whether there is or there isn't, okay, we're talking about a very modest association, one small causal contributing factor. This is not a smoking gun. This is not an aha moment. This is not Soylent Greens are made out of people. Okay, that's not what this is. We're talking about one small potential causal factor that might slightly increase the risk. But if you really look at the data, we have a lot of reason to believe that it's just artifact. And I think that we need to be clear that we're talking about just a small piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah, for sure. That's what's so counterproductive is to what this press conference was. And unfortunately, it kind of, the autism community is up in arms, appropriately so. But it's so, I don't know, I'll use the word depressing again, that resources a lot of resources were apparently put into this, and this is what we come up with. It's a footnote. It's not necessarily a bad footnote. Sure, use Tylenol at discretion. It could be. And I read the report. The report sounds nothing like the press conference, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And then there's the whole element that autism was apparently first being diagnosed around 1910, 1920, something like that. And Tylenol wasn't invented until the 40s or 50s or something. Right. So there's a lot of nonsense.
Let's dig into the paper a little bit. Well, first of all, they didn't really present the science as far as I could see it. I couldn't watch much of the press conference. So you got mad. Producer Dave got mad.
I did get mad, yeah.
I got depressed.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch more of this. The definitive statements coming out of the administration were just so depressing. The reliance on I feel, I believe, I'm so much smarter than everybody else. It was just embarrassing and depressing. I had to turn it off. So I don't know what you're talking about with the politicization from left and right, because I kind of just shut down.
Right. Yeah, and the sad reality, Brian, and you know this, is that most people aren't going to read the paper. They're going to look at the press conference. I mean, that's how most people are going to get their information around this.
So I think the press conference, I think the paper, I think it was something they grabbed at that was already in existence. There's a couple of them out, one from 2023, I think, one from 2022, and one more recent, trying to make this link. But it's a review of existing studies. Right. So this is not an original study trying to define this. They looked at 42 other studies trying to find a causal link.
Right.
And if you look through the list of studies that they looked at, 39 of them, it's all self-reported data.
Right.
With multiple confounders. So I'll let you explain that.
Well, yeah.
Not that there's anything. I mean, self-reported data, observational studies, it's information gathering, hypothesis generating. But it's not the end of the story.
That's right. So this whole, you've seen a ton of social media this week of this whole thing between association and correlation and causation, the so-called ecological fallacy. As I like to say, it's the anthem of the pseudo-intellectual everywhere, right? Whenever you want to undermine data, you can just throw this out there and say, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. It's also true sometimes, right? By the way. But as you know, Brian, and I mean, you know this, but do most people know this, that when this comes up in medicine, in public health and science, and it comes up all the time, that we have a way or a set of criteria that we use to decipher between association and causation. And you know what that is. It's called
Bradford Hill, right?
Bradford Hill criteria.
Don't ask me all 9 of them. I think I can do most of them, but
I
you want to quiz me on it?
I have them written down. And I just wanted to say this because I want people to understand this. So we look at things like the strength of the association. And just to break it down to these two meta-analyses that were mentioned in the report and the papers they look at, because they look at literally a couple dozen papers, right? Strength of the association. So in this case, the association is not strong. It's a relatively small association. We're talking like a 10-ish% association. Is it consistent? Well, in this case, it is consistent, right? It has been consistently reproduced. Is it specific? That's a limitation, right? Because were these specific? Like, what was the outcomes for these papers were actually not specific, right?
So some of them looked at autism, some were ADHD, right? Some of them were, I can't remember the other, but yeah, they kind of lumped everything under autism.
Right. Is there number 4, is there a dose-response relationship? And this is, I think, a critical one. And in this case, if you look on the surface, there was, but we're going to get into it in a minute. Maybe there wasn't, but in a lot of these papers, there was a dose-response relationship between Tylenol and autism. Temporality, that's a given, right? Of course it's temporal, right? You take it, then you get it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just thinking back to the questionnaire. I don't know if you looked into these questionnaires, but one of them, the questionnaire was after the diagnosis of autism had been made, they asked the women, think back now 3 years. Did you take Tylenol while you were pregnant? So I guess it's still temporal. It's just, that's a long way to think back.
True. And just to play the other side of that, there were a couple that the association persisted in the few studies that looked at actually cord blood samples.
Okay, those were the 3 that weren't observational.
Those are the 3 that weren't observational.
Weren't self-reported data, right?
Right. So, but again, that doesn't mean it wasn't confounded, which we're going to get to. Experiment. What is the quality of the study design? What is the quality of the experiment? And you just said a big word, confounding. Are there, for example, wherever the murder rate goes up, ice cream sales go up. But we know that eating ice cream doesn't cause murder, right? We don't think it does. It's warm weather is the confounder. Think of it like a triangle. The confounding variable has to touch both the exposure and the outcome beneath the surface. In this case, were there confounding variables? And we're going to get into that, okay? Because it looks like there were a lot. And then analogy, is the relationship strengthened if it's similar to other causal relationships? So my point being, when you go through the Bradford Hill criteria on this, and I think you'd agree with this, Brian, there are some things that do point that the association might be legitimate, and there are some things that point away from that. I mean, is that a fair statement? It's ambiguous.
I would definitely agree with that. And also, if you get into the weeds a little bit and you look at the risk ratio, they were mixed up. You know, they had hazard ratios, which you can't get a relative risk from. They had odds ratios.
Right.
They mixed those two up on all these 39 studies, and they've had to weed through that to try and come to a final analysis. But in the end, it wasn't really an experimental study, right? It was observational.
It was observational study.
And then when you look at those ratios, a lot of them crossed one. So
Right.
you can explain that if you want to, but that just means sometimes they found an effect, sometimes they didn't find an effect.
Right.
And what that means is, you know, if you take one observational study, if it crosses one, it's statistically insignificant. So you got to throw that one out.
Right.
Well, you don't throw it out, but it doesn't become a strong study to reference.
So what these studies, I guess, what I would say the take home from the couple dozen studies that have been on this, that I think are, you know, that have been looked at, is that there is an association between acetaminophen use and autism, that it is small in magnitude, that it is reproducible, and that it is, and there is a dose response relationship. But here's the catch. It always depends on the quality of the study design, as you know. And as epidemiologists and scientists, we can only control for so many variables. We can only control sometimes based on the limitations of the data we have. If we don't have the data, we can't factor it into our analysis. In this case, it does look like there are a lot of potential for confounding. And last year, there was a great paper published in the JAMA that kind of used a very unique method. Do you want to talk about this?
Let's talk about some of the confounders, though, that were in there.
Let's talk about some of the confounders.
So, for example, if you were more likely to use Tylenol, you were more likely lower socioeconomic status.
Right.
More likely to smoke, I think. More
Yes.
likely to have a high BMI.
Yes.
More likely to have been diagnosed with I don't know if they called it a psychiatric disorder or a mental disorder.
Yes.
So,
Right.
and they seem to discount those confounders.
Well, exactly. So what happened was,
I mean, there were more than that, but those like jump out at you.
so for people at home trying to make sense of this, there was a study in JAMA last year that looked at one of the biggest studies that, by the way, found a positive association between acetaminophen and autism. And it was a study of 2.5 million children in Sweden. And what they did was they used matched sibling pairs as a way to correct for confounding, right? Because these were pairs where one sibling got autism and one sibling didn't have autism. And what happened was, the thinking was that a lot of those things you're talking about, like the differences in the groups, would be naturally intrinsically corrected for by the fact that you were using sibling pairs.
Right. They lived in the same place. They
Lived
had
in
the
the
same exposure from their parents. If their parents were high BMI, all those confounders are going to be the same for both siblings.
Right. And they found,
Well, two things they found. No association
Right.
between Tylenol and autism
right,
when they analyzed with the sibling control. If they reanalyzed the data and they took the sibling control out of it and they did it just like these other studies, they found the association. So
Right.
that it implies, and we can think that it's the confounders that are showing the association because they were able to correct for it. That's my point.
Exactly. So in this study, they basically use sibling pairs to just serve as like a blanket corrector for all the things. And just to clarify, you know, if you're trying to make sense of this at home, what we're saying is that in the women that took acetaminophen, they had higher rates, higher BMIs, higher rates of smoking, higher rates of psychiatric illness, lower socioeconomic status, more likely to have chronic medical problems, chronic pain than the women that did not take acetaminophen. The acetaminophen was a red herring, if you will, for all these other problems that actually caused autism, is what the thinking is. And they were able to correct for this and show this by using sibling pairs. And what I thought was really interesting about this study, Brian, I'm curious what you have to think about it, is that, and this was really impactful for me because this is just one study and there are limitations to it, which we'll discuss. But the dose-response relationship, when you look at all these other studies, there's a dose-response relationship between acetaminophen and autism. Is that because of acetaminophen use, or is it because of the things that are leading you to acetaminophen use? When they did this correction, the dose-response relationship went away completely.
Well, of course, and that's what when you mentioned that before, we were talking about that, the dose-response relationship. If you're taking Tylenol, it's for a reason.
Right.
If you're taking more of it, it's for a more extreme reason.
Right.
So as your Tylenol dose goes up, that also means you were sicker. You had more episodes of fever. You had, I'm not sure exactly what pregnant women use Tylenol. It doesn't work for me.
Right.
So I tend to say it was something else. So, but whatever they needed it for, those was more extreme circumstances. And another thing, I thought you were going to say this, is that they actually found in that study with small use, the hazard ratios were less than 1,
Right.
meaning it implied a protective effect. Now, that doesn't mean run out and start popping Tylenol,
Right.
but it's absolutely the opposite of what these other studies found.
By the way, they also found a protective effect for aspirin,
Okay.
which I thought was kind of random and interesting. Not to say you should go take aspirin, but I just thought, that might not be a real effect either. But
But if you can find a protective effect and a detrimental effect,
Right.
that kind of means that
Right.
you got to start over.
Right, and like I said, don't forget we're talking about a very small association.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
On both sides.
On both sides. So the likelihood that you're going to pick up something with confounding is just mathematically, right? It's just naturally higher. So yeah. So basically, the reason why all these medical groups in the last few days have come out so affirmatively and said we don't agree with this is because this study, and there was actually at least one other paper, I think, that used a very similar design that I was able to find, the sibling match pair thing, and had very similar results. They've been able to sort of show that this association is most likely from confounding, from other things. That is to say, the things that lead women to take Tylenol are actually the things that are leading to autism and not the actual Tylenol itself.
Okay. I did look up some of the information on autism causes, what they think they know,
Yeah.
right? Because it came up, I don't know if you want me to say this or not, but one of the things I really objected to was when the president said that, 20 years ago, he knew more than the people that were studying it.
Right.
And then he went on to say, at least I think I knew more because maybe they knew more, they weren't telling you. So implying this grand conspiracy that has been known all along, but
Right.
we're not going to let you know.
Right.
So there were two issues I had with that, which I guess I get a little angry and a little depressed at the same time. But so I went on to some of the autism, like the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, right? So, they're thinking that about 80% is genetic.
Right.
And the rest of it environmental but it's very difficult to assign that environmental cause.
Right.
So blaming women for something they did during pregnancy, I mean, as producer Dave said, you're probably always thinking, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but,
Yeah.
was this something I did?
Could we have prevented it? Yeah.
Did I smoke too much weed when I was 16? Is this what did it?
I'm
making stuff up.
No, not at all. You do get that sinking feeling. But on the subject of genetics, I think most autism parents would tell you that in their heart of hearts, they know it's genetics. Many of them anyway. Many parents of autistic people, they can see in their family a grandfather, an uncle, or someone who, if they weren't specifically autistic, they were eccentric. They had trouble making eye contact. And it's, a lot of the autism experts, it was like a running joke. Adrian's mom and I, both lawyers, said, oh, it's nice to get some lawyers in here. Usually all the autism parents are in IT because they keep to themselves. They're very introspective. They look mainly at a computer screen. And it's okay to laugh at that because it's so those traits are passed on. So that, again, as you guys have pointed out, is diametrically opposed to the idea that it is any thing that happened during the pregnancy.
Right. So to whittle it down, right? You're talking 80% genetic, 20% environmental.
Maybe 20%.
Maybe based on 50 years of science. And then of that 20% environmental, is there a tiny little sliver that might be acetaminophen? Probably not. But even if it is, it's a minuscule piece of the puzzle.
Can I speak to that? Because I went further and I looked into this. So I didn't bring the study with me. You've got a big pile there. But anyway, from another problem with claiming that the Tylenol is responsible for this rise in autism. The study I looked up from 2019 in a study of pregnant women with the study period was 15 years, right? Tylenol use went down, autism went up. Tylenol use went down 2.5% every year in this study period. And we know from 2004 to 2018, autism has been on the rise. But we also know why it's been on the rise. So anyway, so that also negates this because Tylenol went down, autism went up.
Right. So that just goes antithetical to what they're saying. So look, if I had to try and summarize this, because what's going to happen, as a doctor, people are going to ask me what they should do. And this is the biggest challenge of my job because, we have to make a decision in the face of inconclusive or incomplete data, right? Where we're just looking at the data and making some assessment about how we can make a recommendation to the patient. So if I was to summarize, I think it's super insincere and disingenuous to say that Tylenol causes autism, or to represent that it is a major or the principal reason for why the autism has gone up. It's just not mathematically or statistically factual. I also, however, think I think that it's also insincere, and I heard things from the other side that there's no evidence that autism could be, Tylenol could cause autism. There's no evidence, and that's also insincere and wrong because there is evidence. It's just that it might not be good evidence, but there is evidence, right? And Brian, you probably disagree with this. I don't think the book is 100% closed on this yet, but I think it's like 98% closed because I just feel like this is almost certainly confounding. All that said, there were limitations to the paper. The papers that looked at the sibling matched pairs. The biggest one was exposure misclassification because they use hospital records to look at Tylenol use. But if you really think that out as well, wouldn't that also underestimate? I'm biased towards the underestimate the strength of the association, overestimate the strength of the association. Excuse me. So because he didn't factor in a lot of people that actually took Tylenol, I don't know, but I still think because of the consistency, the reproducibility, the fact that there's only been a couple papers that have actually tried to correct for this confounding, I still keep the door open a crack, but I agree that it's almost certainly confounding.
Okay, so 98%, I'm happy with that number. I'm happy with 90% closed because that means there's a lot of information that's known. My problem with that is that someone will go, oh, well, what about the 2% then? You don't really know, do you?
Right.
You're not certain, are you, Dr. Dennis?
Right. And to which we could say, that's medicine. That's science, right? We're never 100% certain. And I think, and to be fair, I think in this case, it's more than that. Like there's always some uncertainty in the data. In this case, I do think that there is some further work to be done on this issue. But what I would say is if it is a factor, it is an extremely small factor. And I would say that the other thing is you have to weigh the risk versus the benefit, right? And we know that if you have a fever, if you have pain, if you gain weight because you can't exercise because your back is hurting, that's bad for the baby too. And that actually is a causal factor for autism, a lot of that stuff. So I think that in the context of the fact that the information, you could easily argue it's more dangerous to not take Tylenol if you have one of these problems than it is to take Tylenol. And that's why to women, if my patients ask me, that's what I would recommend to them. If you need it in moderation, it's probably okay. But I would explain to them some of the things we talked about today.
Okay. I know conflict of interest has come up a lot in this administration in terms of scientific papers and science, and RFK Jr., every time he gets up there, it's always conflict of interest and it's all corrupt and all corrupt. I don't know if you want to talk about it here, but did you look at any of the authors on the paper?
No, please tell me.
Okay. So one of them actually a couple years ago was part of a lawsuit against the manufacturer of Tylenol and one of the large retailers. And the judge found that this guy is actually manufacturing evidence and he's not an expert.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, this second paper that this person's an author on is just kind of gearing up like science for hire. So now they have a published paper.
Yeah.
Right? This guy can take a published paper into a courtroom now and say, look, see what they found, even though he's on it.
Right.
And let's also face facts that it's not the greatest journal that this paper was published in. It's one of those pay-to-play journals. They've had a lot of retractions for bad methodology. So it's not like this was published. I mean, it's not I don't know if you want to talk about that part of it at all, but we'll get into it deeper at other places. But if you're going to whine about conflict of interest, you might want to point it out when it goes against you too.
That's a very fair point. A very fair point. So the last thing I want to end with, I see we're pushing to a half hour, is just, I just want to say to the audience and people that watch this, and I hope this was educational and helpful to people. The issues that are present, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, the issues that are present in this particular issue are not unique to this issue. They come up throughout medicine, science, and epidemiology. There's always some nuance, some subtlety, some way data can be interpreted, some ambiguity. And I want people to really understand that it's really, really hard to prove causality. It's really hard. In this case, the weight of the data suggests, I believe, that there is no causal association by far. But even if there was, it's really hard to prove causality. And there's always ambiguity in the data. Information can be spun to serve an agenda. And I want people to take a look at the ambiguity in this situation and see how information can be used to serve an agenda, because I think that is a really important take-home message that people should learn from this thing.
I absolutely agree. I don't know anything that's certain, or any scientist that would say, I guess there are some things that are certain, right? But still, we say they're certain, but there's always a little bit.
Well, just to give you an example on that, right? We know that tobacco use causes, say, lung cancer, right? How many decades did we fight about that? How many decades did tobacco companies fight with scientists and the government and the public about this really almost borderline indisputable relationship?
Oh, it was indisputable. When you get down that road, it was indisputable, and they knew it.
Right.
They hired scientists to find contrary evidence that they used. You know, they lost that in the mid-2000s, and they were, with racketeering.
Right.
It was a conspiracy. They knew they knew nicotine was addictive, and they knew it was harmful.
If there's ambiguity in the data, which there always is, and people have an interest, if they have a stake in it, they can use that ambiguity to serve their agenda. Right. And I think that is the most important take home from this whole thing. Like, because this is coming up everywhere. We live in a culture of information. Information is so available to us. A lot of it is misinformation, and a lot of it is information taken out of context. That's why I do this podcast, because I want to help people in the public be better consumers of scientific information. Look at this case as a textbook. Two sides using this to serve their agenda. The truth, I think, is on clearly more towards one side, but everyone's using it to serve their purpose. It happens all the time. So consumers, audience, the public, take notice.
All right, Dr. Dennis, thanks for having me in here today.
It was a pleasure. I'm so glad you made it.
Oh, thanks. And as I am not a doctor, I will say this. I read the studies. It's my interpretation. It's my opinion of these and what I know about this. So
yeah.
I'm not giving any medical advice.
We'll save the Boston Sports Minute for next episode, producer Dave.
Yeah, unless you want to do it real quick. I don't mind.
No, that's good.
Okay.
We'll save it for next time.
Right.
Thanks to everyone that watched us. Have a great weekend. Hope this was helpful, informational, and find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Hit us up with questions. We'd love that. Love to help answer them. Be good, everyone.
Thank you so much.